All right, so welcome to another podcast for our next portion on OKRs. Now we got Brother Long here joining us again. So good morning to you, Brother Long.
Good morning, brother.
And in today's session, we wanted to actually explain how do you use the tools, how do you use OKRs to actually manage your workforce? And so let me give you the background for this. Most workers in today's society are knowledge workers. And what distinguishes knowledge workers from a traditional worker is that knowledge workers know more in their domain area than their bosses. So the traditional approach of actually telling people, here's what activities you should do, it can't work because the supervisor doesn't know the best activities to do. The actual knowledge worker does. They know more than their bosses. And so we want to create an environment where the knowledge worker understands the results. They understand what outcomes they need for the organization. And they can make the decisions over what is necessary, what needs to get done in order to achieve those results. And so the whole purpose of having OKRs is to explain, here's what the results look like. Here's your aim. Here's your destination. So workers, you choose how to actually arrive at your destination. Now, this becomes important when we discuss like how do we use it to manage your workforce. You want to have some conversations with your workers to make sure they clearly understand here's what they're expected to produce. And this goes into two parts. There's an outcome, and usually when we express outcomes, we're expressing here is a result for people external to our organization, right? I want customers to actually feel X and to get excited, right? No, an outcome for this podcast is we want business people to be able to understand the material in this podcast, get excited about it, and use it to make their businesses more profitable. Right. So that's an outcome. But then there's also an output. So sometimes we want to produce something physical, something tangible as a result. Right. I was talking to my daughter the other day, and she was explaining how she wanted to do more cooking. And an output that she has is a library of different recipes, favorite recipes, so that she can pull these things off the shelf and cook to her heart's content. So you got outputs and outcomes that you have to worry about. What I want to do as an employer is I want to make crystal clear the outcomes and the outputs for my workforce. And if I can make sure that that's clear to them, then I can rely on them to make the decisions over what activities are necessary to produce those outputs, to produce those outcomes, so that we have what we need for our organization. Let me pause. How are you feeling about this, Brother Lon?
It is still in a line with telling us how we want to do the thing that you said in theory, which was making sure that the entire organization from top to bottom is aligned. And so now we're giving some more detail into how to make that happen.
Absolutely. And again, a lot of times you can't get aligned if I don't know what I'm supposed to produce. I don't know the exact details. So what I want is the manager, the supervisor, to make sure that we have these conversations on the OKRs, and so until it's crystal clear, the employee knows exactly here's what the outcome is. Here's how I measure it. Right. So here's how I know that the outcome has been produced. here's what the outputs are, and here's how I know that those outputs have been produced. And when both those things are known and crystal clear, then I have some basis to become a line. If those things aren't clear, you don't have any leg to stand on to produce the alignment that you may want. And that's when things become difficult. So again, I clarify those things first, right? And I want to quiz the worker. And when I say quiz them, again, I want to know, I need verification that they understand what the results are that they're supposed to produce. So when I work with my daughter and I say clean your room, right? I don't just stop there. I quiz her. And I say, you know what? When your room is clean, how are you going to know? Let's describe it. What are the acceptance criteria? You know, hey, all your school sweaters, she goes to a private school, so they have a uniform. All the school uniform, they're all hung on the right side of the closet, right? So everything's neat. They're already pre-ironed so that when she gets up in the morning, she can just grab one, right? All your undergarments are in the middle dresser drawer, right? All of your shorts are in the bottom drawer, right? So there's certain characteristics that we can observe to know that the room is clean. And I want to know, we want to have the conversations with the employees to make sure that all that criteria that you would check to make sure that we've accomplished the goal, that we both understand each other and that we agree to it, right? So I'm going to quiz them on that. Once we know that you understand what the end result is, now you can actually go forth and start making the decisions to get there. But I got to know that you know first, right? How are you feeling about this?
Makes sense. We wanted to, and it makes it objective because people will feel that they're doing the right thing, but by having it spoken and agreed upon or written, it becomes objective whether or not they've achieved or are doing the right work.
Now, the reason we're so big on metrics are indicators. So when we develop our OKRs, we develop metrics that indicate whether or not we are progressing, achieving that OKR, or whether we're far off. So you have to develop the metrics and the thresholds that give you that information. And as a manager, what I want to do is I want to make sure that not only the OKRs are visible to the workforce, but also the metrics, the thresholds, and actual measurements. I want people to be able to see, hey, if we were supposed to actually make 10 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, I want you to see that you only have 5 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches of good quality right now. And that way, if 75% of your time is up and you've only produced 5, I want you to be able to make the determination on your own. It's like, oh, wow, I only produced half what I was supposed to, but 3/4 of my time is up. I'm behind schedule. Need to make some decisions. I need you to be able to analyze that yourself. So I need you to be able to see the numbers, see the statistics, so you can come to some reasonable conclusions on your own. And then you'll change your own behavior. If I have all the data and you can't see it, you won't change your behavior because you won't actually have the information necessary to do your own analysis on where you're at from a progress perspective. So you won't even know that you're supposed to change your behavior. So again, I got to create this environment where you see it. You see where you're at. You know where you should be at as far as progress. And then you can do that analysis and change your own behavior. How do you think about this?
It's about it gives them self-management. It sounds like some of the principles in Scrum, where it's not up to the manager to tell the people what to do. It's up to them to know what they need to do.
Absolutely. When we discuss Scrum, what we discuss is that most things, the powerful force that drives it is feedback. And so you want to make sure that the environment has these natural feedback mechanisms so you know where you stand. And then you can make adjustments on your own. And so what the manager needs to do, how we use the tools, you make sure that they understand the OKRs, make sure that you force it so that in their daily work, they can see the metrics, they can see the measurements on the metrics, they can see the thresholds, they can see how they should interpret it. Right. And when I see how I should interpret it, and it's in their face, now it's easier for me to start coaching them. When I see the metrics and I see that you've only produced 50%, but you're 75% through your schedule in the time box, and I come to the conclusion that, hey, you're not going to make it doing the same activities that you're doing right now, then now I'm empowered to have conversations with that employee to see if they came to the same conclusion. So I can meet with them and see, hey, look, you were doing these activities before when you were in the circumstance where you had enough time to do all the work and accomplish the goal. But now, if you're only halfway through, but 75% through the schedule, I know that you can't do the same activities that got you here, because the activities that got you here made you late, made you behind schedule. So now I know you need to do some different activities. Now I can have this discussion with you and see, hey, what are you working on? Right? How are you going to make it? And if I see you doing the same thing you did before, I can give you immediate feedback. Well, I know those activities aren't the right ones. Right? Because I forgot you here and you're behind schedule. You got to do something different. Let me know what you're doing different. Right? How are you going to accelerate your productivity so that you can actually work at a faster pace than when you worked at before? Let me pause. How are you feeling about this?
It makes a lot of sense. Everything makes a lot of sense. And again, we're putting the meat on the bones because we say that we want people to be able to self-manage and then self-assess. And now we're going through these. I would like you to say a bit about the difference between metrics, thresholds, and measurements.
Absolutely. So a metric is a design for how you measure something. Right? So it's how you measure something. And there's a metric of, if again we talked about peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, right? How I measure that we were making those peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, it would be an example might be a count. I would count the number of successfully completed peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Right? So again, that's the metric itself. A threshold is a level of metric data, the measurements themselves, that has a specific meaning. So if my goal is 10 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, the threshold level of 5 means I'm halfway through. Right? So a threshold indicates a specific meaning. And I need to actually have those thresholds have that meaning in order for me to do appropriate analysis. A measurement is when I actually go out making observations and actually take samples that indicate here is the count. Now, here is the number that populates that metric. Now, so again, when I actually go ahead, I said that the metric was the count of the peanut butter and jelly sandwiches we made as an example. When I actually go out and count the completed peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, the measurement is the actual count. That I had 5. And so I need all 3 of these different components to make things work. Out of the 3 components, what I consider the most important is the threshold. Again, we're doing this to do analysis. I need to really understand the threshold and what they mean. If I reach this target, what does it mean? So I can form a conclusion, because it's my conclusion that actually determines what behavior, what activities that I do next. And we got to make sure that we agree on the conclusions in order for us to be in sync and aligned. What do you think about this?
I think it's amazing how all this is unfolding into a what we call a harmonious oneness.
Yeah. And again, I'm going into some detailed specificity over things that we kind of take for granted on a normal basis, right? No, again, everyone's gone through school, and in school they have a grading system, right? So there's a metric of how many for the percentage of right answers divided by the total number of points you could actually obtain for a given exam, right? So we take a percentage, and we have thresholds. In most school systems, if you get 90% or above right, that 90% threshold percentage means you have an A, right? And that means you have mastery of that subject. And 80%, between 80% and 89% is that threshold of a B, right? So we have these thresholds that say, here's where you are. And that 90% threshold says you had complete mastery. The 80% threshold says, that's pretty good. 70% threshold says, yeah, here's what the average student knows is you have a fairly decent grasp of the subject, but if you get below 70, it's like you don't really understand this stuff. Right? And you need some more work to get a better understanding. And if you are below 60%, it means you have no clue. So we naturally use these thresholds, and we assign meaning, and we've done this forever. And what the OKR methodology is all about is applying those same principles so that you can use it in your businesses. You have to actually sit down, think about what are the thresholds, what do they mean? So based upon that meaning, you can determine here's what actions you should take once you actually reach these certain threshold levels. And without having that framework, lots of times, if you haven't thought through it, you will naturally choose to do some behaviors that may not be appropriate for the situation that you're in, because you just haven't thought about it enough. You haven't analyzed it. What typically happens in a lot of businesses, again, and statistics show that in the first 5 years, I think it's like 3 or 4 out of every 5 businesses go out of business. And most times that happens because they don't have enough cash flow. And, if you don't actually say and think about, hey, well, what level of cash flow, what cash level is a good level? And when should I hit this number, I just stop spending, right? I hit this level and I should start laying off employees. If you don't think about those things in advance and associate the thresholds with the meaning, then you won't take the right actions. And then a lot of companies don't do it. They run out of cash and then can't pay the bills and just go bankrupt, right? So, again, you have to use this stuff, think about it in advance so you can make these objective decisions when the time arrives. How you feeling about this? Does this make sense?
Yeah, I think it's very important that we have a way to do objective analysis.
Right.
You had a saying, in the absence of data, we use emotion.
That's right.
Something you had.
No, you.
And so I'm just so used, I'm not accustomed to people actually giving you the tools to accomplish the theory they outline.
Right.
It's kind of like when they tell you to love your neighbor as yourself, but then they don't tell you how to love yourself.
Right. It's like a lot of good that advice does, right? No, you're exactly right. Right. And again, what we're doing here, we're just breaking things down so that people can see here's exactly how we do this. And when you break things down into the component pieces like we're doing, it makes life so much easier. When I can actually see, oh, I'm going to measure this, right? I'm going to measure how many peanut butter and jelly sandwiches we make. And I know that if we're halfway through, but 75% through the schedule, I know we're behind. And in advance, I'm like, hey, this tells me I probably need to go out and ask some people for help. Or I may have to go out and reset expectations and let people know that, hey, I'm going to be short on my delivery. But if I can actually figure that stuff out in advance, I figure out here's the threshold, here's what it means, and here's what actions I'm going to take in advance if that were to come into play. Then I can make more objective, logical decisions, and it wouldn't be the knee-jerk reactions that are driven by emotions that possibly would not lead me to the right course of action to fulfill the OKRs. And it's important, it's powerful to be able to actually have this together ahead of time where you can be objective. But again, most people don't take the time to strategize this thing out. And everyone talks about risk. In most business cases, they talk about risk. There's practices on creating risk mitigation plans and things. But people don't actually know what to do about the risk themselves. And if you use the OKR framework, using the thresholds, I could think about, well, what happens if I reach this threshold, but I don't, the rate at which I'm going isn't fast enough to obtain the objective. Now I can actually really deploy and figure out what I should do about those risks. It's not, pie in the sky theoretical. It becomes very practical where I have, here are specific actions I can take.
And so I'm just now getting familiar with Jira, but is it how? So is everybody okay? I understand everybody on the team. We're going to do a daily scrum, and we're going to talk about. We're going to use our daily scrum to help us make sure we're doing what we need to do to get where we need to be.
Right.
So then, is everybody going to be going into Jira and looking at stuff to make sure that they're seeing these things we're talking about? Is Jira the tool that displays that for everyone?
You've got it. So, but what we do inside of Jira, if you go to reports, there's a section of it that is called the sprint burn down. And what the sprint burn down does is it looks at, here are the total amount of work that I should do. And every day the tool indicates here's how much of that work is remaining. So you can see a graphical display that lets you know, say you had 10 units of work that you were supposed to complete. Every day is an indicator that says, here's how much of that 10 you've actually completed and how many you have to go. So I can look at how much time I have left in the sprint versus how much work I have to do. And I could do some quick calculations to look at, well, is the rate at which I'm doing the work sufficient for me to be able to complete the work on time? And every day in the daily stand-up, I should look at that indication, see if the rate is fast enough, and see if we're on track. And if we're not, the daily stand-up is designed for us to replan. Our current plan, if it's not at the rate that's going to make us finish on time, is insufficient. We can't do those same activities the same way and think that we're going to reach the goal. And so what we need to do is actually replan, rethink about, given that the current plan we had isn't sufficient, what should we change so that we can actually get everything accomplished? And remember, keep in mind, the sprint goal, I took the KR, the key result, and I decomposed it. I said, what piece of this key result could I do in this time box? And that's how I developed the sprint goal. So if I can't complete the sprint goal within the time frame that's expected, I certainly won't finish the whole key result within that quarter, right? And going through this, it lets you be able to see and do the analysis easy to say when we need to actually change things. How are you feeling about this? Does this make sense?
Yeah. So is someone, maybe as a Scrum Master or maybe the developer themselves. So I'll just say for exercise, as a Scrum Master, am I looking to make sure what they're telling me during the daily stand-up is matching what needs to happen in the JIRA?
You've got it.
And then if they're telling, okay, because my job is to make sure the Scrum process happens, which this encompasses.
Correct.
Okay.
And so the Scrum Master, again, they have a big job for analysis. They need to actually do exactly what you said. I need to actually look at what's happening within the team, and is this correctly reflected inside of JIRA? Because if what you're doing isn't correctly reflected inside of JIRA, inside the tool, then you can't use that tool, the graphs that it creates, to do the analysis. And you won't be able to see when you're behind schedule and when you need to change your behavior. So the structure make that happen.
This is making a lot more sense now, because I was a little bit vague on what the Scrum Master would be doing in the day-to-days outside of having meetings.
Right.
But now, in order to have a successful meeting as a Scrum Master, you would have to be able to be analyzing what everybody's doing, so you know where to step in to make sure that the Scrum process is happening.
Right. In a way, the Scrum Masters are guardians of quality also. Like the team owns it. The developers should be building things in a quality way. But let me show you how this works out. Our goal is to make 10 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. The team says, hey, we're on track. We're 75% through the schedule, the time box, but we have 8 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Well, it's the Scrum Master who needs to say, hey, what's your definition of done? Did the sandwiches that you say you completed, were they inspected by the product owner? And did the product owner actually approve of them? Because if the product owner didn't say, that these sandwiches made the characteristics. You said you were done, and you're acting as though you are done with those, but you could have had some defective sandwiches, right? So let's say three of those peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, they're not fit for human consumption. You drop one, it got all the dirt on it, right? Nobody wants to eat that. You're supposed to put it inside of a plastic bag so that it was protected from the elements, and you forgot, so you just have it out. The bread started getting stale. So some of these sandwiches aren't ready. So if three of them are going to get rejected because they aren't really fit for human consumption, then really you only have five, and you're 75% through the schedule. So you're really behind schedule. And you don't know that you need to make more sandwiches, right? The Scrum Master needs to look over all these things, do the analysis to make sure that we know where we are. And when we know where we are, now we can make some appropriate changes, some appropriate decisions on what to do next. Without that Scrum Master keeping everyone honest, we'll actually come to some very false conclusions, right? If we didn't follow that definition of done, and you had 8 things that you produce, and you didn't actually realize that 3 of them don't really count, you have to redo them. You think that you're good, so you're not even trying to make these additional sandwiches. How you feeling? Does this make sense?
Yes.
So again,
it's making sense, and it's filling in a lot of blanks.
So the Scrum Master job is instrumental in actually making sure that we have a good handle on where we are, that we're doing the analysis appropriate, so we can see if we're on track to meet our key results, to meet our objective. And this is so important. You break things down. We decompose the work from the objective, decompose that into a key result. We decompose that into a product goal, decompose that into sprint goals. And then if you're not making your sprint goals, you can actually see the effects all the way up. Well, you didn't finish this piece, you're behind here. Well, if I didn't finish my sprint goal, that means I'm not going to achieve my product goal, which means I'm not going to achieve my key result, which means I'm not going to achieve my objective on time. So you want to be able to see that relationship and see the effects of it. Oftentimes, the main problems we have are that we can't see the effects of our decisions. And when you have OKRs and everything lined up, it makes it much easier to see those effects and see how we need to change things so that we can obtain the results that we want in the end. Hopefully that gives everybody a good feel for the integration between OKRs and the Scrum Team operations, because sometimes people treat them as 2 separate things. But if you're doing this correctly, they're tightly integrated, and you can see the progress and how one thing affects the other, right? If this all makes sense,
yes,
we're going to go ahead and wrap up this portion of our podcast for the week and for the day. And any last minute comments from you before we wrap up today?
Well, I now understand why our Scrum Master certification is not the beginning. I mean, it's not the end. A lot of people, even though you told us it was just the beginning, a lot of people had the idea that I'll get this certification and then I'm ready to go.
Right.
But to be a high level Scrum Master, there's more to it. And I'm excited because we had talked about creating Scrum games or something like that. And I started thinking today, my mind is starting to take the things I'm involved in into my life and try to put them into the little bit of Jira I understand now to track my own processes in life.
Right.
So now I'm seeing how we can go from introducing them to Scrum and Agile, and then create our Scrum games to show them how to use Jira in order to Scrumify their daily life.
Mm-hmm.
And then that is going to go a long way to be impressive in the interviews and being able to lock up the job. And I'm now seeing how, we could really take someone and mold them into something extremely valuable for companies.
Absolutely. And what you said is, it's extremely impressive. Hearing you say that, being able to see the connection. I tell people all the time that if you practice the things we're talking about in your daily life, then even if you don't have the job experience and you're trying to get a job utilizing Scrum, utilizing Agile, it doesn't matter. If you're practicing in your daily life, it's the same concept. And you'll be able to actually get the job, pass the interview, and perform because you have been doing it. You didn't have it in the work context, but if you do it in the personal context, then you have the experience necessary. It's just applying it into a different area, and that's when you get dangerous.
You'll be able to speak the language,
right?
You'll be able to speak the language, man, because if you can take whatever you're doing in your life and create a could you I didn't understand, maybe we can save it for another time, but I hadn't seen, I seen about creating different things, creating epics, creating bugs, creating tasks,
Right.
but I hadn't came across creating fields yet in any of the things I've seen.
Actually, so we'll do that tomorrow, right? It is
Okay.
I talked about in this podcast in different episodes 3 major analysis tools, right? It'd be the horizontal analysis, the vertical analysis, and decomposition. So in the next episode, what we'll do is we'll discuss how you decompose. There's all these facets. You got epics, you have stories, you have the bugs, and we'll go over what all these things mean and how they actually contribute in this whole process, mainly decomposition initially, and then how it affects your horizontal analysis and your vertical analysis. So we'll go over how all this stuff fits in the next podcast. That work? All right.
Absolutely.
Well, thank everyone for coming out. We're going over in our next episode tomorrow, and we'll go from there.
All right.